All right, let's dive in. Today, we're tackling project agreements.
Yeah.
Now, I know what you might be thinking.
Hmm.
Not exactly the most exhilarating topic, right? But hold on.
Right.
This stuff is crucial, really, for any successful project, collaboration. It can be the difference between, well, a project that just soars and one that crashes and burns.
That's a great way to put it, really. It's such a vivid image, and it highlights why we're doing this deep dive.
Mm.
Because getting that project agreement right, well, it's more than just, the formalities. It's about setting the stage for everyone to work together, smoothly, productively, ultimately successfully, right?
Absolutely. And our source really emphasizes this, you can't just throw something together at the last minute. It takes prep work. Like, remember that old saying, failing to prepare is preparing to fail?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about the groundwork you lay before you even say the words, like, negotiation or agreement.
So are you saying it's like, what, approaching it with the detective's mindset or something?
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Actually, the source uses this phrase, it's a little jargony, but it says, analyzing the bonds of the negotiation. But really what it's getting at is understanding everyone's motivations, what makes them tick, like a detective gathering clues.
Okay, so instead of dusting for fingerprints, we're like, what, mapping out stakeholders' motivations?
Exactly. And the source breaks it down into four main things to look at. Understanding the stakeholders themselves, then their common interests, the power dynamics, and, of course, any constraints that might pop up.
Okay, so stakeholders. I mean, that seems pretty self-explanatory, right?
You'd think so, but it's more than just knowing their names and titles. It's about, really understanding their roles in this whole thing, what their individual goals are, how they relate to each other, have they worked together before, any past conflicts. The more you know about all of that, the better you'll be able to, navigate the negotiation. You can anticipate challenges, leverage those points where they align.
It's like creating a character map before writing a screenplay or something, right? You need to know everybody's motivations to write a good story.
I like that analogy. And, well, on the flip side of understanding potential challenges, there are common interests. That's where you can start to find those win-win situations.
Right, because in the end, a successful project agreement isn't about, one side winning. It's about finding that sweet spot where everybody feels good about the outcome.
Exactly. And that's where understanding those common interests comes in. What are those shared goals that can bring everyone together? Maybe it's delivering on time and within budget. Maybe it's about meeting certain quality standards. But identifying those shared priorities will help make it feel more collaborative, less like, an us versus them situation.
So it's more like we're all on the same team working towards the same goal. Okay, so this next one, power dynamics, this one always feels a little, I don't know, trickier. Are we talking about who has the upper hand in the negotiation?
Yeah, that's really it. And, it's not about being manipulative or anything like that. It's about being aware of those power structures, right? Does one party have more leverage because of their expertise or maybe their budget or even just how urgent the project is?
So it's about being realistic, right?
Yeah.
Acknowledging that not all negotiations are going to be perfectly even.
Exactly. Being aware of that helps you go into the negotiation with a more informed and strategic mindset.
It's like our detective, casing the joint, looking for escape routes, potential dangers, that sort of thing.
And speaking of potential dangers, constraints. Because every project, no matter how well you plan, is going to run into some kind of roadblock.
No, absolutely. Reality has a way of doing that, right? Budget limitations, deadlines sneaking up on you, resources being stretched thin.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to identify those constraints early on, to set realistic expectations right from the start, and, hopefully avoid those nasty surprises down the line.
It's like making sure our detective has all the facts straight before, going into the interrogation room.
Precisely. All right, so we've got our stakeholders mapped out, common interests identified, we've acknowledged the power dynamics, and we've taken stock of those potential constraints. What do you think, what's next on our pre-negotiation checklist?
Well, before we start, drafting demands and counteroffers, shouldn't we figure out what we want out of this whole agreement?
You're spot on. The source really emphasizes this. A successful negotiation starts with knowing your own objectives, what your priorities are. So what does a successful outcome look like for you in this particular project?
It's like, what's that saying? Begin with the end in mind. We need to define what success actually looks like for us before we, even step into the negotiation.
Yeah, exactly. It's about being really clear about our goals,
Yeah.
right? What are we absolutely not willing to budge on and what's, negotiable? Where's the wiggle room?
Because it's easy to get caught up in the back and forth, the offers and counter offers, and lose sight of what we're actually trying to get out of this whole thing. And speaking of getting caught up, how do we actually approach the negotiation? Is there a right way to do it? It can't just be showing up with a list of demands, can it?
Well, you'd be surprised. But you're right, there's definitely an art to it. Choosing the right approach for the situation. Our source actually highlights 3 common negotiation strategies, and knowing when to use each one is key to a successful outcome.
Okay, well, fill up my toolkit. What's the first strategy?
Let's start with the collaborative strategy, often called the win-win approach.
Win-win, huh? Sounds good to me. Everybody loves a happy ending, so how do we make sure it's actually a win-win?
Well, it's about communication, really listening to the other side and genuinely trying to understand their needs, seeing it as a problem you're solving together, not like some kind of battle.
So more like we're in this together, not it's me versus you. When is this collaborative approach most effective?
It's great when you're dealing with long-term partnerships or, if you already have a close working relationship. Anytime keeping things harmonious is really important.
That makes sense. You wouldn't want to burn bridges over a short-term win. But what about when a win-win just isn't realistic? What if the other side has a totally different agenda?
Well, that's when you might need a different strategy. Have you heard of the competitive strategy?
Oh, is this where I get to unleash my inner negotiator? I've been watching a lot of Shark Tank, so I'm ready.
I admire your enthusiasm,
Oh,
but maybe let's not go full Shark Tank just yet. This approach is about advocating for your own interests, right? Knowing what you're worth and being willing to walk away if you're not getting it.
so knowing your non-negotiables, being prepared to walk away from the table, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And it works best when you've got some leverage. Maybe you have a skill set they really need, or there's not a lot of competition, or maybe they're under a tight deadline.
So it's about using your strengths strategically, understanding the situation, but it sounds like it takes some, I don't know, finesse.
You got it. Assertive, not aggressive,
Yeah.
confident, but not arrogant. Right. Even when you're being competitive, you still have to be professional, respectful of the other party.
Right. Even sharks can be charming when they need to be.
Okay.
But let's be real. Not every negotiation is so black and white, either all collaborative or super competitive. What about when it's somewhere in between?
Well, that's where our third strategy comes in,
Uh-huh.
compromising.
Meeting in the middle. Classic split the difference tactic.
You got it. It's about finding that middle ground where both sides are giving a little ground to get to an agreement they can both live with.
So picking your battles, figuring out where you're willing to concede and where you absolutely can't budge.
Exactly. It's a useful strategy when you're short on time, when nobody has a lot of flexibility, or when preserving the relationship is more important than, winning every single point.
So we've got collaborative, competitive, and compromising. 3 very different ways to approach a negotiation, like having different tools, each one for a specific job.
Exactly. A skilled negotiator knows which tool to use and when, just like, a craftsperson.
Yeah.
You assess the situation, you figure out who you're dealing with, and then you choose the approach that'll help you reach your goals.
Okay, so let's say we've navigated the negotiation, chosen our strategy, and we have an agreement. Are we done? Confetti time.
Whoa, hold on there. Not so fast. Our source points out a really important step that often gets overlooked in all the excitement.
Verification.
Oh, right, because even the smoothest negotiation can go south if you're not careful with the details, right?
Exactly. It's about making sure that what you agreed to verbally is actually reflected in that written agreement. Those little details matter. A small oversight can cause a big headache later.
Okay, so time to put on our meticulous hats. What should we be looking out for during this verification stage? First and foremost, deliverables. Are they crystal clear? Measurable outcomes, realistic timelines, and who's responsible for what, all spelled out.
Because nothing throws a project off track like someone not knowing what they're supposed to be doing or by when.
Exactly. And those deadlines, gotta love them, right? The agreement needs to clearly state those key milestones, delivery dates, any contingencies that could impact the timeline.
Because, well, time is money, and a missed deadline can throw off the entire project.
Absolutely. And remember those constraints we talked about earlier. Budget, resources, all that. The agreement has to align with those limitations, make
Hmm.
sure the project is actually doable, and, avoid any financial surprises.
It's about making sure everyone understands the scope of the project, the resources, all of it.
Exactly. And finally, don't forget about any legal stuff, organizational requirements, any specific clauses or approvals you might need. It's crucial to make sure everything is above board, legally sound.
So it's like our detective, making sure they have all their evidence lined up before they present the case. Solid facts, clear timeline, no loopholes.
Perfect analogy. And remember, this verification process, it's not just about catching errors or preventing disagreements later. It's also about making sure the agreement still fits the project goals and that everybody is, happy with the terms.
It's that final check-in, like, okay, does this reflect what we set out to do? Making sure everyone's on the same page before we actually get started.
Exactly. You go into the project with that shared understanding, a strong foundation for working together, and that peace of mind knowing you've crossed your T's and dotted your I's.
Yeah, like that last huddle before the game, right?
Hmm?
Making sure everyone's clear on the play and ready to go.
I like it. And it's funny, when you think about it, we're talking about project agreements, but there's so much more to it. So much wisdom we can apply to, like, all kinds of collaborations.
Absolutely. It's about building those relationships, making sure everyone can communicate clearly. Ultimately, like you said, setting everyone up for success, right?
Exactly. And speaking of success, our source actually ends with a really interesting point, something to think about as we wrap up. Remember when we were talking about power dynamics in negotiations?
Yeah, that whole idea of being aware of those imbalances. I mean, it makes sense, but actually doing it, that's a whole other story.
Right, and the source actually takes it a step further. It asks us to think about a time when maybe WE had the upper hand in a negotiation.
Oh, interesting. So not just understanding it in theory, but thinking about our own behavior, right? Like how we handle power.
Exactly. It's about asking those tough questions. Were we always aware of that power dynamic? Did we use it, responsibly, ethically? Or were there times when maybe we didn't even realize we were taking advantage of the situation?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, those are some tough questions. It's one thing to notice it when it's happening to you, but it takes some real self-awareness to see it when you're the one with the power.
Absolutely. And that kind of reflection, that willingness to examine our own biases, it's so important for building those, really fair and equitable collaborations.
Yeah, it's about approaching every negotiation with integrity, no matter where you stand.
Perfectly said. And that's what I find so fascinating about this whole topic. It's not just about contracts and signatures. It's about empathy, self-awareness, ethical decision-making, those really human skills.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into project agreements, I think the biggest takeaway is that it's about more than just the deal itself. It's about those relationships we build, the collaborations we create.
It's about being a little bit of a detective, a little bit of a diplomat, always looking for those win-win situations.
And hey, you might learn a thing or two about yourself along the way. Until next time, happy collaborating, everyone.